Markets across Asia are mostly down after slower than expected data out of China and the impeachment of South Korea's president. The UK economy contracts for the second consecutive month, raising concerns about slowing growth. And inflation continues to surge in Russia, with rising costs and Western sanctions putting pressure on households and businesses alike. Hello, I'm Taiba Aydin with the latest business and finance news here on TRT World. Asian markets mostly fell on Monday as investors assess key data out of China. Chinese stocks led losses, with the Hang Seng falling 0.7%, while the mainland CSI 300 was down more than 0.3%. China's industrial production rose by 5.4% in November, mildly exceeding market expectations and supported by increases in manufacturing and mining activities. Meanwhile, retail sales grew by 3%, the softest rise in 3 months and well below forecasts of 4.6%. Meanwhile, South Korean indices were also lower following the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol over the weekend. Moving on to the UK now, where the economy shrank for a second consecutive month in October, despite predictions it was getting better.
It contracted by 0.1% following a drop in September. This marks the first back-to-back economic contraction since the pandemic. While October saw a setback, the UK economy did manage a modest 0.1% growth in the third quarter. But this is a significant slowdown compared to the 0.4% growth in the second quarter, signaling the UK economic's momentum is weakening. The manufacturing sector was the hardest hit in October, with activity dropping by 0.6%, followed closely by construction, which saw a 0.4% fall. The services sector, which dominates the UK economy, stagnated with no growth at all in October. The unexpected contraction sent ripples through the financial markets. The pound took a hit, dropping 0.43% against the euro by Friday. The slowdown in growth can be attributed in part to the ongoing impact of the government policies since the election. The Bank of England's monetary policies also play a role in dampening economic activity. Although the bank has already reduced interest rates twice this year, they remain relatively high at 4.75%. This higher borrowing cost is adding pressure on both businesses and households. The Bank of England's next interest rate decision is this week, but it's widely expected that rates will not be reduced further. In fact, traders are now betting on a more aggressive pace of rate cuts in 2025.
For more on this, I'm joined by Francesco Rizzuto. He's the Dean of the School of Law at Liverpool Hope University. Good to have you with us, Professor. Now, this is the second consecutive month of contraction for the UK economy. What's driven the decline?
Good morning, everybody. I think that what we're seeing is the hangover, if you like, of the uncertainty that became very, very obvious once Labour won the election as to what they were going to do. And once they announced what they were going to do, it didn't sound very nice for many people, especially the productive side of the economy. So in many ways, what we're seeing now are the consequences of the fears and uncertainties that preceded the budget. And of course, the budget confirmed some of the worst fears, with the government increasing taxes, national insurance contributions by 25 billion, which makes the cost of employment more expensive here. So in a sense, what we're seeing is the carry-on, like the overflow of what happened before October the 30th.
And taking all of that into consideration, what are your expectations for the end of the year?
Well, the expectations for the end of the year are that essentially things are going to continue in this way until the tax rises, if like national insurance rises, work their way through the system. But really, the problem in this country is that our biggest trading partner, the European Union, is not growing particularly fast, 0.4% is nothing really to write home about. And if your biggest export market, even in services where we have obstacles because of Brexit, even if there's a little bit of growth there, it's certainly not going to be enough to pull us through. Certainly not in the last quarter, perhaps next year. But again, Mr. Trump comes into play from January, so that his threats may become real. That again creates uncertainty in the UK economy. So it's really navigating not too far ahead, really. Bank interest rates, as your report mentioned, it looks as though they might come down for 0.25%. Unlikely, because actually we mustn't forget interest rates compared to the Eurozone rates are quite high here. So people are afraid of investing. People are afraid of spending. The cost of living and inflation effects, if you like, are still in this economy. And it's not going to be that easy to simply throw them aside without major structural changes outside this economy, if that makes sense to you.
And looking at manufacturing and construction sectors now, how concerning is the slowdown there for long-term growth?
Very concerning, because the cost of employment, the cost of investment, if you like, has gone up. So people are quite reticent about taking investment decisions when they realize that the structure of their costs, if you like, are going to increase. The government, it claims to be investing and going to make it easier by, I think the big totem here is to try and grow relax, if you like, the planning law so that we can start building houses, as though that's going to be a major pull factor, if you like, in economic growth. We will have to see. These things will not happen overnight, really. So I'm not really that optimistic, as I say, without being clear about what the Americans are going to do. And what is going to be crucial over the next 15 months or so here is what kind of trading relationship will we have with our biggest trading partner? Neat and simple, really. We don't need to get lost in the detail on that, because the friction in trade between us and the European Union, albeit a slowing or not a particularly quickly growing European Union compared to the United States, as an example, even that sort of limited kind of spur is still a much needed one for us.
All right. Francesco Rizzuto, Dean of the School of Law at Liverpool Hope University, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now a quick look at some of the other top business stories from around the world. In better news for the UK economy, Britain has officially become the first European country to join the Indo-Pacific trade bloc. Earlier this year, officials signed the accession treaty, which has been hailed as the country's biggest trade deal since Brexit. The membership is expected to boost Britain's ailing economy by as much as $2.5 billion a year. Bitcoin has hit another record high, topping $106,000 for the first time. That's after President-elect Donald Trump said he's planning to create a US Bitcoin strategic reserve similar to its strategic oil reserves. Trump is also planning to nominate pro-crypto Washington attorney Paul Atkins to head the Securities and Exchange Commission. China's new home prices have fallen at the slowest pace in 17 months as Beijing ramped up stimulus measures to help the crisis-hit property sector. New home prices were down 0.1% in November, month-on-month, following a 0.5% decline in October. In annual terms, prices are still down around 5.7%. And Egypt has inaugurated a $500 million solar power plant in the southern city of Aswan. The move comes as part of its push to boost renewable energy capacity following severe power outages last summer. The plant is expected to generate 1,500 gigawatt hours of clean energy annually, enough to power about 300,000 households. Inflation in Russia continues to rise as the country deals with poor crop output and the lingering effects of Western sanctions. The central bank has hiked rates this year to control prices, which it says are above expectations. Emre Boz has the story.
As snow blankets the capital Moscow in white, a very expensive winter may be ahead for many. The rate of price rises have been on an upward trend since the beginning of the year. Inflation rose to 8.9% in November, up from 8.5% in the previous month.
Prices have gone up fast and hard in the last 2 years. Before, you could buy a bag of groceries for 1,500 to 2,000 rubles, and it was a normal bag of groceries. Now, of course, it is impossible to buy for such an amount.
And for some consumers, these price rises are making shopping more difficult, with prices for potatoes, a staple food for many Russians, rising by 64% in November.
I limit myself in many things now. I don't buy beef. It's expensive for me. I still buy chicken for soup, milk and bread. I rarely buy cottage cheese either, because everything is very expensive. I buy just enough so that I don't starve to death.
As domestic demand falls in the country, this is bad news for producers who lose out on local consumers. So why are prices rising? One of the main reasons is a severe summer drought followed by extreme frosts, which have affected crop output. And increased costs have also played a role, with wages rising 8.4% year-on-year in September from 7.7% in the previous month. Western sanctions have also made imports more expensive by making logistics and payments for Russian businesses more difficult. The country's trade surplus has continued to fall this year, meaning it's importing more than it's exporting. The surplus fell to more than $9 billion in October, with imports surging 17.4% from 2023. The central bank has responded to price rises by hiking interest rates 200 basis points to 21% in October. This is to reduce any demand-driven inflation by making borrowing more expensive. And the Russian government has also promised to up investments in key sectors to increase supply of goods and services. By increasing supply to meet demand, they hope they can reduce prices. Emre Boz, TRT World.
Let's get more on this now with Olga Krasniak in Moscow. She's an associate professor at the Higher School of Economics. Thanks for joining us, Olga. Now, firstly, what's driving Russia's 8.9% inflation and how is it impacting the ordinary citizen?
Well, indeed, unfortunately, we have inflation and it is rising. But of course, too many reasons we can notify. So it's domestic reasons and something related to geopolitics and foreign policy, because we know Russia in the state of military conflict, and we need to understand it affects the economy. So in real terms, we see the economy is working, everything is producing very well, but at the same time, depending on domestic demand, so we see maybe like a different situation. So the reason number one, I believe it's a global economy, because inflation is everywhere. And the second one, it's of course sanctions. But on the short-term perspective, we see Russia needs and Russia is doing something to somehow to reorient the logistics, to understand and to manage how to do payments with international actors. So this third reason, some domestic issues related to seasonal demand, because now it's Christmas, now it's a new year, and normally people buy a bit more, but maybe the supply is a bit less. So just too many reasons. The important thing is the Russian government and the central bank, they're doing something to slow the inflation, and we need to also to understand that Russia has resources, Russia has people, Russia has energy. So, and in this case, those are the main factors which we need to account for optimistic prognosis.
And how are sanctions and poor crops reshaping Russia's trade and economy?
I will start with the poor crops. Maybe it's not that poor because I do not see this shortage of food. Yes, the prices are high, but here is no shortage of food in the shops. But the sanctions, of course, they have a certain impact. Like I said, in the short run perspective, even in a mid-run perspective, we see Russia needs to adjust. Russia needs to adapt. Because still we have our relations and economic relations with foreign partners, and it's important to manage this payment transactions and everything related to this, those things, and they somehow we have many obstacles of this, definitely. But in a long-term perspective, maybe it's a good push for Russian economy to produce everything what we need inside Russia, and it relates to our economic sovereignty and financial sovereignty. So, like I said, in the short run, we have certain obstacles, but in the long term, well, it's a good push for our economy and our economic sovereignty.
Okay, Olga Krasniak, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your analysis. Now, this next report is from inside a Captagon drug factory in Syria operated under the Assad family. Captagon, a potent amphetamine, has been at the center of a long-standing illegal trade. Syria is the world's largest supplier, reportedly fueling the regime's finances and international sanctions. Our correspondent Obeida Hito has the details.
Captagon, a powerful stimulant that has made headlines across the globe. Produced in factories like this one in rural Damascus's Douma. The global trade volume of Captagon is estimated to be $10 billion annually.
In 2010, this building was a potato chips factory. It was confiscated by the regime in 2017 and purchased by Amer Taisir Hayati in a public auction. That's when it was changed from a chips factory to a narcotics production facility. It was owned by Amer Hayati and Meher al-Assad. They put officers from the 4th Division in charge and wouldn't let anyone come near.
Large sections of the factory were set on fire as the Assad regime's 4th Division began retreating from Damascus. Parts of the production line are still evident, including a charred pill press and bags for packing the product. Underneath the warehouse, thousands of pills were left behind, most of them packed and ready to be shipped. Millions of dollars worth of Captagon pills, a drug produced by the Assad family and sold into international markets to fund their war against the Syrian people for more than a decade. Originally developed in the 1960s for medical use, Captagon requires mixing dangerous chemicals and specialized equipment to extract the final product. Cheap production costs and a huge demand for the drugs in the Middle East made it a convenient way for the Syrian regime to make money as it felt the pressure of international sanctions.
These are all precursor chemicals that they use to produce the drug. The next day after the regime fell, we were surprised to find this drug production facility. We thought it was just military here. We found plastic fruits filled with pills and electronic equipment. Amer Hayati and Meher al-Assad were partners in this business and were sending this drug to Saudi Arabia and other parts of the world.
The new government has placed guards at the factory to ensure no one comes close. Anas Muhammad says Maher al-Assad would visit this particular factory personally.
Captagon is a poison that Mahir used to destroy our youth. He would also give it to the soldiers. He used to export to Saudi Arabia and other countries. Many large shipments have been intercepted, even though he tried very hard to hide them.
The United States has sanctioned nearly a dozen individuals and entities that are thought to be involved in the illicit narcotic production. They say the Assad family business was not only making them rich, but securing funding for both the killing of Syrians and Lebanese Hezbollah's own terror operations. Obeida Hito, TRT World, Damascus, Syria.
West African leaders have started the last ordinary meeting of the ECOWAS. That's because 3 of its founding members, the now military-led states of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, are pulling out and setting up their own separate alliance. It could have a major impact on free trade and movement for the region, as well as security in the Sahel region. Brenda Rodido reports.
The military coups in Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali since 2020 have been a major concern for Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS. The regional bloc slapped trade, economic and political sanctions on the junta-led countries. And in January this year, The military leaders made it clear they were leaving the regional bloc, accusing it of planning an armed aggression against them. They've since formed their own alliance.
Indeed, the formation of Alliance of Sahel States has already made it possible to see, around Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger, an honorable coalition based on a common defense architecture and pooling of resources, nurtured by visionary solidarity in the image of the serenity shown by the authorities and people of Burkina Faso, and Mali in the face of armed aggression planned by ECOWAS against Niger.
Despite lifting sanctions to give dialogue a chance, in February 2024, ties between the bloc and the military leaders remain bitter. Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali are still bound by the ECOWAS Treaty, which requires any state intending to leave the bloc to give a year's notice. The period will end in just over 6 weeks. ECOWAS saw the region's risks disintegration and infiltration by armed groups if the pullout goes ahead.
To complicate the situation, our region has become the arena of geostrategic and geopolitical rivalries and the theater of misinformation and disinformation that engenders mistrust among and within communities and undermines social cohesion.
In a show of defiance, the military leaders of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali failed to attend the last ECOWAS summit in July and staged a summit of their own instead. And as the future of the bloc remains in jeopardy, the junta leaders have already ruled out any prospects of returning. Brenda Radido, TRT World.
It's peak wedding season in India, the country which boasts more weddings than anywhere else in the world. And these weddings don't come cheap. According to a recent report by banking firm Jefferies, an average Indian family spends more than $14,000 on a wedding. That's 3 times their annual yearly income. Smita Sharma reports on the big fat wedding industry.
Neha Chandra and Mihir Ghandat are exhausted, yet overjoyed, having tied the knot in a dream wedding. The Delhi Punjabi girl said yes to the Mumbai Marathi boy this month in celebrations lasting several days across 2 cities and encompassing both their cultures.
I think millennials who are like inching towards 30s, right, have grown watching the movies back in 90s, 2000s, right? Bollywood does have a major impact in the way we are conditioned today in terms of how we celebrate, be it small functions to weddings, right?
The elaborate preparations for the wedding started in August last year. The bride's mother oversaw the planning, arranging events with multiple vendors.
They wanted all the functions basically, mehndi, haldi, whatever is in the trend these days to have these functions, mehndi, haldi, sangeet and a wedding, and they wanted a day wedding.
The wedding industry in India is massive. Over 10 million people rely on it for their livelihoods, including caterers, decorators, photographers, videographers, makeup artists, wedding planners, musicians, the list goes on. In November-December alone, weddings will generate some $71 billion in business. These include some 4 million budget weddings and 50,000 luxury weddings with a spending of over nearly $120,000 or more as per trade body Kate.
An average wedding used to cost 70-80 lakhs earlier. Now the same thing, the same portfolio, the same services is for not less than 1.2. So the prices have gone up, the expectations have gone up, and people are ready to spend a lot more to get similar kind of work.
Weddings also help boost other economic sectors like apparel, jewelry, tourism, and consumer durables. Increasingly, Indians are also paying for destination weddings. Thailand, Greece, and Turkey are some of the most popular places.
The Ambani wedding made international headlines for months and even stunned the rich and powerful across the globe. While others cannot compete with that kind of luxury, millions of Indians do spend the money on fancy weddings with a strong Bollywood flavor, often raising the question if this is a valuable economic driver or a gross overspend in a developing nation. Smita Sharma, TRT World, New Delhi.
Well, that's all your business news for now. Thanks for watching.